Welcome everyone to the first panel discussion of the day. I hope you've already been having a great morning. The title for this discussion is Beyond PropTech, Future-Proofing Your Real Estate Portfolio. So we're very honored to be joined by three of the most experienced and knowledgeable real estate owners, developers and landlords and investors in the UK. Just to introduce myself, I'm Gary Chimwa. I'm the founder of Future PropTech. We have been organizing the world's leading PropTech conferences since 2015. And it's great to see the innovation that has been happening in our sector over the past few years. And of course, this is what we'll be discussing today. I'd like to begin just by asking our speakers to give a very short introduction about themselves. So I'll start with yourself, Sally.
Yeah, so I'm Sally Jones and I'm from British Land and I head up strategy, digital and technology. So in that role, I guess I'm responsible for the back end of technology and also the front end and what we call smart places.
Great, thank you. And yourself, Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Miller. I'm Head of New Investment at Grosvenor. And Grosvenor, for anyone that doesn't know it, is a privately owned real estate business within the UK. It's an investor, it's a developer. It manages a part of central London called Mayfair and Belgravia. And my current role involves looking at investment opportunities around the UK and in particular, setting up joint venture partnerships with investors and developers.
Thank you. And James?
Thanks, Gary. My name is James Fortescue. I'm a partner at Europa Capital. Europa Capital is a pan-European investment manager. We're part owned by Mitsubishi, who are one of the largest property companies in the world. My focus is on acquisition, and I also oversee some asset management and realizations, mostly in the UK. And we specialize in value-add investments. So we typically look at 5-year holds, but trying to reposition property for future occupier and investor demand.
Excellent. So I'd like to begin by asking, what role does PropTech currently play in your portfolio? I'll put that forward to yourself, Sally.
Okay, so currently it's actually quite limited relative to the size of our real estate portfolio, and I'm guessing you're not surprised by that. And historically, a lot of what we've done, I guess, in the tech space, loosely you could say, is in energy efficiency. So the last 5 years, we've probably driven a 50% reduction in energy usage across our office portfolio. And I guess more recently, what we've been focused on in, I guess, the PropTech space is smart enabling our buildings. So essentially that's about putting the infrastructure in place, thinking how we connect the hardware together and create a data platform that we can use to hold and process data. And I guess then alongside that, it's thinking about how we work with occupiers so they can link into that infrastructure we've created for. Of course, without that, the building is only so smart because we control the shared spaces, but we need to be able to sort of, I guess, link in all the occupiers within the space to make the buildings truly smart. So that's where we're focused at the moment. And the best example of that at the moment is 100 Liverpool Street, which is a building we're just in the process of completing, and occupiers are going to start moving in to fit out very shortly. And in that building, we're going to put our own flexible workspace provider called Story. And that's the first part of the demise space that will be smart enabling.
Great. So it sounds like really it's beyond PropTech as the title of the talk, and really looking at partnerships and just innovating the entire business model in general.
Yeah, you have to work with your occupiers because that's how you create the intelligent space.
Great. And James, can I ask the same question to yourself?
Yes, I mean there's a lot of synergy between what Sally was saying and what we're doing. I think on the physical property elements, on the construction side, it's also thinking about design and materials for future proofing, and also making sure that we're sort of upgrading existing property. We do a lot of refurbishments where we can have really efficient systems and data collection, and increasingly better connectivity, which is one of the key focus of tenants. But we do also use software and platforms at the moment, just in our everyday activity as a fund manager, whether it's collecting units for energy consumption, water usage through Sierra, alternatively on a fund management basis, looking at being able to track data and then present it to ourselves, to our investors, to our investment committees. And we use VTS and iLevel as some examples of that software, which allows us to analyze performance and also look at sort of data-led strategies to change our investment decision making. And then for marketing, I do a lot of marketing, not only on the sales side, but also lettings to sort of realize the business plans. So there's a lot of changes that are going on at the moment, a lot of software that we're sort of embracing, whether it's creative web designs, video tours, 3D interactive walkthroughs, VR, and CGI, certainly for developments. Those are the things that we've been working on.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Sounds exciting. And for yourselves, Rachel, what would you say is the role of PropTech currently in your portfolio?
Well, we have a fairly major focus on innovation in the business at the moment. So we are actively piloting and trying to roll out various new technologies. And I'd say the key goals for us is sort of number one, how we work with our customers and with our local communities, and also in particular sustainability, because we have an ambitious goal to be zero carbon by 2030, and we're trying to do everything we can to achieve that. So I caught up with our property management teams recently, and they've recently concluded a pilot with a software company called Demand Logic. And what this does is it monitors and targets energy reduction, and it works alongside the plant that's already within our properties. It tells us when there's inefficiency, whether that's due to overheating, that the plant's running out of hours when it shouldn't, or whatever the situation is. And we trialed it in two of our larger properties and actually achieved really good results. We've got over a 20% reduction in energy use. So of course, we're now rolling it out across our estate. Aside from that, we're using various platforms to let space more flexibly, whether that's meeting rooms on Breather, retail space by the hour on Seek, or parking spaces on Just Pop. And we found a client of Built ID, which you may have heard of as well. And that's all about community engagement around developments. And it's really enabled us to hugely increase not just the depth of consultation, but also the breadth. So that means reaching people who previously we might not have managed to speak to about our developments. So yeah, absolutely. I think we're big believers in how tech can help us achieve those goals.
Amazing. Which kind of brings up to the follow-up question which I had, which is around how you're currently adopting technology. Do you see that as something that has already started increasing? Do you see it accelerating because of everything that's happening around us?
Yeah, I mean, we have, as I say, it's something we've been looking at for a while, but actually we have had a new CEO in the UK business this year, and there's been a real drive, I think, partly because of him, to become a much more kind of data-driven business, so to really use data to understand some key insights around our customers. So I think that's where I predict a lot of the future kind of adoption would be around data.
All right, great. At a British land, Sally, is that the same in terms of adoption of technology, the rates that it's been happening?
Yeah, and I think if we just quickly start with the data, I think that we've been focusing on data and insights for some time. And so I think that for a real estate business, we've probably got quite a sophisticated insight team who actually started off doing a lot of work on retail, things like footfall and how people are using our schemes. And we're now sort of using that increasingly to understand our office campuses as well. And of course, that capability is going to be really useful as we start getting data from the buildings themselves. So putting like sensors in buildings to understand how the space is being used, what the air quality is like, and then how we can optimize the use of the space. So I think that is going to, we're going to be able to leverage some of the skills we've been putting in place for the last 5 years or more. But I think specifically what you were asking about is what do we think the role of technology is going forward in the real estate? I mean, I think that, we've heard a lot about the fact that real estate is one of the least tech-enabled industries in the world. It's one of the largest, but it's the least tech-enabled after agriculture, I think people say. So I think the first piece is, the industry's clearly got a long way to go, because if you look at other industries, we're some way behind. I think what we find is that in areas like, where we're driving insights, let's say footfall, etc., it's quite easy to use tech. I think where we find where you're trying to move it into the building, it's actually much more complicated. And we're finding that it takes longer probably than we hoped to implement some stuff within the buildings themselves. And also because you have to figure out, how you work with your occupiers to leverage that technology. So, and I've been asked many times recently about, do I think the pandemic will accelerate the use of technology in real estate? And I think, your first instinct is it will do. I think what I fear is that the forthcoming recession will probably temper some people's ambitions, because people will be looking to cost cut first and foremost. So I would worry a bit about, as I said, how the forthcoming recession will actually hold back some of the innovations we might want to put in place.
Very interesting. James, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the impact of COVID and the relation to adoption of tech?
I mean, I'm perhaps, I think thinking about it further down the line, I think, property will have to adapt, the design of property will have to adapt as a result of technological improvements. Sally, as you said right at the beginning, it's all down to the occupier. And I think the occupier will be first and foremost changing how we design and create property. From Europa's perspective, we're very much looking at our investment strategy and just making sure that our investment strategy meets the sort of changes that we anticipate going forward, and the changes that are brought up as a result of technology changes, as a result of the ability to have far greater data on our buildings than we've ever had before. So, we in terms of our investment strategy, we're very much looking at, urbanization trends. We're looking at sort of growth spots, the types of people who are occupying our buildings, whether they're younger people, what kind of jobs they're going to be having, how close or how far away they are from their dwellings. And then we're also very mindful of, how they're using their energy and, mindful of the constraints and that are going to be put in place certainly in the next few years in order to meet the 2030, 2050 sort of carbon emission changes. And then also, in addition to that, I think we're very conscious also of real advancements, certainly with regards to connectivity, certainly with regards to the sort of tenant and consumer experience of property. And that, when we're going to be selling a property in 5 years' time, we're going to be benchmarked on our ability to create a building that has really good connectivity, that has the ability to have connectivity that has capacity, flexibility, and real diversity, and not create sort of binary real estate that we as an industry had created 10, 20 years ago. We're really looking at buildings that resonate with regards to people's health, their happiness, and their productivity. And I think those advancements, getting back to what I said at the beginning, are really going to be led by the occupier, and we're just going to have to react as an industry much more quickly.
Oh, very, very interesting. Rachel, I mean, Grosvenor has owned some of its real estate for 300 years.
Yeah.
What would you say are the advantages of having such a long-term approach?
Well, I think there are two major advantages. So one of them, of course, being that long-term nature of the investment. The other advantage that I think Grosvenor has is that it has a concentration of ownership. So it has these large areas of contiguous ownership where it can really invest in managing not just those individual buildings, but investing in the whole area. So, placemaking, the buzzword.
Right.
And I think that what those two together give you is actually the potential to be quite visionary about what you're doing. And this is, of course, true of many other real estate companies at the moment. I mean, I don't want to put words in Sally's mouth, but I mean, look at what British Land are doing in Canada Water as well. But that was true for the development of Mayfair and Belgravia 300 years ago. And it's still true today when you look at something like Grosvenor's large build-to-rent site in Bermondsey. It's all about, from an investment perspective, that long-term sustainable income rather than looking for those shorter-term trading profits. And, you know, a really good example of where you can put that to use is something like the plans that Grosvenor have for Grosvenor Square. And Grosvenor Square, I mean, the clue's in the name. It's right in the middle of the estate. It's right in the middle of Mayfair, for anyone that doesn't know it. It's very large. It's actually larger than Trafalgar Square, but it's fairly underused as a space. And what we've done in the past year or so is we've put out a major call for ideas, which was developed together with the local community, with a lot of local input. We recently appointed as designers Tonkin Liu, and they have a brief to design London's most outstanding green space. So it's a really, I think, exciting venture, and I think, you know, we'll see amazing changes for the better in the future. And so Grosvenor will be investing very significantly in a space which is public, and it's, you know, it's managed by Grosvenor, but that's on a not-for-profit basis. So in terms of that investment, Grosvenor is not going to be making returns from that green space, but the returns then come in the long term from ensuring the success of that whole area into the future. So for me, I think that's an example of where it works really well. You know, you can invest in the streets, in the spaces, not just CapEx, but also OpEx, looking at kind of running events and cultural activities and marketing and all of the rest of it. But you need to have that long-term approach, I think, to be able to do that really effectively.
Absolutely. And in that same sort of, on the flip side of that, obviously, this very fast-paced world, what would you say are the sort of disadvantages of, you know, the long-term approach, if any?
You know, one disadvantage, I guess, is just yield, because again, if you look at Mayfair and Belgravia as examples, they are very successful places. They have very high values, but, you know, if you compare the rental income to their values, that means the yield, particularly in residential, is actually very low. So in terms of kind of running a sustainable business, that can then make things more difficult. Right. So yeah, there are challenges too.
I can imagine. Sally, just to sort of focus on the 2030 net carbon zero sort of target and ambition that British Land have got in place. You know, it's a very ambitious target. So on a high level, can you share how, you know, how this will be achieved?
Well, so we've committed to be net zero by 2030, and what that looks at in terms of how we develop our spaces, so embodied carbon, and also how we run our places. So all developments delivered after, actually April, we're now past that, April 2020, are going to be net zero carbon. And we're going to look at a 75% reduction in operational carbon emissions across our whole portfolio by 2030. And I think, to be honest with you, we don't know exactly, you know, each part of how we'll get there to 2030. Yeah. But obviously we're working through those plans, and we do know they're very ambitious, and we're going to have to work with our design and our delivery partners on developments to ensure that we can meet that embodied carbon target. Some of it, but hopefully a small part will be delivered through offsets. I think it's much clearer when you look at operational carbon, how we're going to deliver that target. And there, just to kind of return to the theme of this particular session, is that here that tech is going to play a really important part in how we reduce the operational carbon in our portfolio. And I return to what I talked about right at the beginning, is we think that smart enabling all our schemes is going to be really, really important. And here, again, returning to the original theme, is about we can put the infrastructure in place in our buildings, but we really do need to encourage all our occupiers to work with us. They need to be willing to, I guess, share data, need to link into the systems we put in place and share data so that we can make our buildings really, really efficient. So did that answer your question?
It does, actually, because I was going to ask you if there's any particular technologies that you're already, spotting as these are the ones that will really help to sort of accelerate and help you achieve your goals in that time
Well,
frame.
I think what we're hoping is that technology will move on as swiftly as it has in recent years in terms of how we deliver. So obviously we're using technologies around today, but I think we can be pretty confident that between now and 2030 that new technologies will arrive which will help us deliver that target. If that's not too woolly an answer, but that is the reality, isn't it?
It is indeed. And James, as obviously an investor, how are you approaching your sort of targets around sustainability?
So in terms of underwriting deals and assessing our investment strategy as a value add fund, we're very focused on flexibility, durability of design, making sure that we're building buildings that are probably more bespoke for office occupiers and that embrace their technological needs. I think there's going to be more of a blurred line between the workplace and people's private lives. And so we've got to be designing buildings that allow for that, allow for people to have that access to technology, but also physically allow them to be able to benefit from being in closer connectivity to not only their dwelling place, but also amenities as well. And then, within the office buildings themselves, we just need to be very mindful of tenants, expanding and contracting within the building quite rapidly. So, you might have, less travel, which means there's more people in the buildings, potentially at peak times. And so we need to be in a position where we can have much greater flexibility in terms of meeting rooms, much greater flexibility in terms of the number of people occupying and the density of occupation of buildings. And also, we just need to make sure that there is, enhanced connectivity, speed, diversity, and security of that connectivity within office buildings. And in the long term, I can see that there's going to be more data gathering, and that will obviously inevitably lead to greater efficiencies, not only for companies, but for office occupation. And it does behove occupiers to start providing much more data so that we can create a much more efficient and productive workspace environment.
Thank you very much, James. And Rachel, so at Grosvenor, obviously with slightly older buildings, some up to 300 years, what's the general approach to sustainability that you're already implementing?
We've got a very wide variety of sustainability initiatives around getting to zero carbon. But I think one thing that's quite interesting to pull out is just how we can make existing buildings work for us, because I see a lot of talk about new development and how to make new developments more sustainable. But actually, talking from that, I'm going to just talk from that kind of 300-year perspective because, it's kind of unusual. But we have buildings that were, originally built as houses and over the years have then been transformed maybe in the 50s to offices and then maybe back to houses or to some kind of exciting retail concept or whatever it is. And actually, if you look at the stables, the muse houses, they've gone through the same process. So there's a lot to be said, I think, for the adaptability of buildings. And, those examples really show what can be achieved there. And that, in a way, is the most sustainable thing of all, because what you're not doing is knocking them down and starting again. But then, of course, we do have to really give a lot of thought to how we can make those buildings more environmentally sustainable as well. There's actually there's a John Ruskin quote that I really like that I'm just going to bring out, which is, "When we build, let us think we build forever, which I love, because I think that's what it's all about if you're investing with a long-term perspective. And thinking, 20 or 50 years into the future, the majority of buildings that we will have then in the UK, they already exist. We're not knocking down and starting again. So what I would love to see is actually more technology that focuses on existing buildings and even heritage buildings. And we've actually managed to do a lot with, grade T listed buildings and bringing them up to a very high BREEAM standard around sustainability. But those are kind of currently projects which, they're concepts, they're a proof of concept. But I would love to see ways in which that can be rolled out much more widely.
So Sally, what would you say is the short to medium term impact of COVID-19 that you're already seeing in the offices sector?
Yeah, well, I think that probably the broad answer to your question is that the pandemic largely is accelerating trends rather than creating absolutely new ones. That's kind of our overall feeling about it. But I think clearly it does mean that the sort of trends that British Land was investing in, we're going to have to accelerate some of the things we're doing. So the kind of real estate that we were focusing on is real estate which is kind of, I guess, at the higher quality end of the market, one which people want to put their people in, which is reflective of their brand, is where people want to come and collaborate, create, where you attract people to the real estate by the quality of what's provided by the employer. So a lot of the real estate that we own is, to Rachel's part, it's in places which coalesce buildings, which have public spaces, where we invest a lot in the public realm and the amenities. So where we invest in the space, we put investment in upfront, and essentially we look to recoup that investment over a longer period of time, because over time we attract more people and ultimately they pay higher rent. So we don't think that, I guess, the direction of travel is very different. I think what we think will make us want to do more sooner rather than later, things like people will want more flexible spaces. I think they'll want to use their spaces more efficiently. So maybe we'll have to provide more amenities which can use alongside it, like more meeting rooms which they can share, more conference rooms they can share. And I think also we think that people will want us to provide more services along with that flexibility, because they'll be, I guess, a bit more uncertain about what the future will hold. So that's overall in a nutshell. I think the same kind of spaces, but more flexibility and more services alongside it.
All right, thank you very much. And James, Europa is obviously very active as well in retail and logistics. Just on that point of the short to medium term impacts of COVID, can you let us know what your approach is?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of our logistics portfolios, which sort of comprise logistics, big box, as well as last mile. So it's, sort of what we call in the UK multi-let light industrial. And, there it's actually been, we've had over COVID, actually it's been, well, I wouldn't say it's positive, but we've had, positive rental collection, much more positive than pretty much every other use class. And vacancy remains low. And, it is a sector where there's a limited amount of supply, and that's just going to exacerbate. Some businesses are doing well. If you're a delivery company, then you are going to be doing very well. If you're a fresh food distributor to restaurants, you're not going to be doing so well. But I think to answer your question, what needs to adapt, what needs to change, I think what's probably going to change is the way that we're managing much of that real estate. It's a lot more going to be down to data collection. It's a lot more down to making sure that we really active manage those assets, a lot more human to human interaction, but also using information that we garner to be able to use it to our best advantage over a portfolio basis, and then also sell that information to the next purchaser as well, which is something that that will be to our benefit, certainly if it's good data. And then in addition to that, just making sure that you work with your local partners. In Europa's case, we have local partners across Europe, just to make sure that we can manage and communicate really clearly with them. On the retail side of things, I mean, I don't cover shopping centres, I cover more retail warehouses, but actually over COVID, that did in our portfolio relatively well, partly because, you know, they are in the open air. Two is that I suppose that you're able to access them by car, which is the preferred form of transport during a lockdown. And three is, you know, just in terms of sheer convenience, you know, the majority of the stores that we have in our portfolio are convenience stores. You know, we have a mixture of supermarkets, not so much fashion led. I think over the long term, what's been quite interesting is that subsector of retail having done okay in this downturn, and with us as landlords being able to collect data and see how it's performing. I actually think it will become perhaps a differentiator, a slightly different to the rest of the sector, where a sector that's had, you know, obvious woes as a result of e-commerce impacts and rental falls and consolidations of tenants in that sector. So that's been one positive, which has been really interesting as a result of COVID-19.
All right, amazing. And Rachel, Grosvenor's more active within residential. Can you let us know a bit more about the sort of impacts that you're seeing around COVID and what?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, Grosvenor, I guess, is active in all sectors, and I mean, certainly been working a lot with our retail tenants recently. But I'm really happy to focus on resi, because actually I think one thing that coronavirus has shown is actually how resilient the residential sector is as a whole, and in particular sort of kinds of alternative resi such as build to rent and senior living. And, you know, those sectors are actually doing pretty well at the moment, and I'd say they're really good places for investment. I mean, certainly what this pandemic has shown us, I guess we already knew to an extent, is that fundamentally you don't need a place to work. You can work from home. You know, I'm at home at the moment, and you don't have to go into a physical shop to shop, but you know, you do need somewhere to sleep. And these are highly resilient sectors, and to some extent you could even say counter-cyclical, because if people are struggling economically, then they're actually less able to they're less able to buy somewhere and perhaps more likely to rent. We know rent collection so far has gone well for build to rent, and the RICS recently removed their material uncertainty clause as a result. And looking just in the future, I mean, I know you asked about the kind of more kind of short to medium, but you know, maybe this is still medium term, that say by 2025, we know that around 25% of households are likely to be in that rental sector. So there's a huge opportunity there to build really good quality and professionally managed rental housing. And that, of course, is happening already, but there's interesting opportunities within that. So 40% of those households by that point will have kids. And at the time, at the moment, when you think about a build to rent block, you think about a sort of shiny tower in the city centre, perhaps. But in the future, I can see a lot more demand for that more perhaps suburban or low density kind of family friendly build to rent style. So that's a really interesting opportunity. Another thing just to quickly mention, in the senior living sector, so we recently submitted an application for a development called the Cundy Street Quarter, and that includes within 170 senior living flats. And again, if you look at the kind of growth potential there, so the population of over 75 is due to increase by 50% in the next 15 years. And, you know, we are building it, but from a very low base. So there's still comparatively very little specialist housing there. And plus, when you think about it, it's actually the wealthiest demographic, certainly in terms of property. So there's a very clear investment case there as well.
Okay.
So I'm a big resi advocate.
in terms of the sort of work from anywhere, you know, trend that's happening, is that starting to affect some of your plans around residential, how you design and how you?
Yeah, we've definitely been looking at what we've been designing in terms of the fact that people we can see are going to 100% want space to work. They're going to want outdoor space as well, private outdoor space. as well as communal outdoor space. And actually, I think that what we have been designing works very well for all of that, fortunately. But certainly when you look at some developments that have been built over the last few years, they, I wouldn't say that they meet that criteria particularly well. Fortunately, I believe ours do.
Okay. So finally, in closing, since our audience consists of around 40% tech and PropTech companies, what sort of challenges are you facing as a company that you would like to see more solutions of? And I suppose this is more to do with types of technologies, whether it's around data or IoT, any sort of broad challenges that you think this is really super interesting for us?
It might be helpful if I just start with what we're looking to achieve. So when we think about technology in our business, we're thinking about three things. It's first how it can make our real estate more efficient, how it helps us better understand our customers, and also then how it improves the user experience. So I think that's a useful way to think about what British Land is looking for. So obviously in terms of like efficiency, we're very interested, as I talked before, about things like energy efficiency. And in terms of, if you think about how we help people understand how real estate is used, things like sensors are very important. So we've been experimenting with sensors in our own building and also in one of our clients' buildings. And I think that with the challenge that we face, it's still quite a nascent industry. And it's difficult to find a sensor which does, I guess, a collective job. So you might want to measure space for things like how people are using it, what the air quality is like, what the temperature is like, but yet there's no one single sensor that you can put in place. The second thing is that if you do want to use different sensor companies, then you've got to worry about how you integrate all that different data into one place. And so I guess what we're finding interesting is the emergence, I guess, of companies which can, I guess, facilitate some of that integration, who can allow us to use a different range of sensors, as well as seamlessly integrate that into a single place, so then we can take all that data and aggregate it and use it. So, and then I think that it's also helpful if when people think about the technology they're bringing to us, is the cost of that technology. So, for example, we're looking at one group of sort of sensor technology, and when you unpick the whole cost, it's about £1 per square foot, which if you're an occupier, that's actually a very big cost. So I guess in summary to your question is that I think it's asking people to think about how we can really deploy the technology in our real estate, and then also the cost of that real estate and how the cost of that technology and how you can justify passing that cost on to the occupier, because ultimately that's what you've got to do. You've either got to get in rent, or you've got to be able to recover it in the service charge.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And James, on the technology side, what technology would you like to see that would tremendously make your life easier?
Well, I could be very specific, but I think from my perspective, just on a sort of more generalist point, because there are so many technologies involved, what I can see in the sort of short-term horizon that we look at as an investor, I can see that there's probably going to be limited opportunities to undertake as many new developments as we would have done in the past, partly because of constrained financing and also a prospect of a downturn. So we're going to be doing probably a lot more refurbishing of buildings, dealing with obsolescence. And so, what would be very useful is to be able to have the ability to work with technology that would work on those older buildings. And I think, have the ability to have flexibility of choice, flexibility of our connectivity to ensure that there's, better technology to help humans' physical interaction with real estate, and also help us to collect data efficiently, not just collecting data for data's sake. And then going into a bit more specifics, I suppose, energy and the efficiency of energy and the efficiency of how occupiers use space is going to become much more key, certainly in urban environments. And so really just embrace technology that allows it, that flexibility of use within the buildings, allows us to, the blind to come on if it gets too sunny, the lights to turn off if no one's there, but take it to that next step that, inevitably technology is going to take us to, and just make sure that that we have buildings that can be upgraded, because one of the issues that one always has is that you put in this technology into a building, and then within a pretty short period of time, that technology changes, which is always quite frustrating. So it's really just making sure that we have sort of more empathy from technology providers with regards to the constraints of occupiers, but also landlords and investors who are building that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And yourself, Rachel, any final thoughts on the sort of technology that you would like to see?
Well, I've already mentioned that I think that improving the sustainability and the energy efficiency of existing buildings is a key one. But apart from that, just to be a bit specific for a moment, I already mentioned senior living. And I've looked a lot into that sector over the past year, and it strikes me that there is enormous potential in the world of senior living and also care homes in terms of looking after those older people that live there. And I've already seen that there's innovation around things like putting sensors in skirting boards, which can help detect when somebody falls and make sure that help is sent to them immediately. So there's things like that, which are about how they live their lives and making sure that they're safe. But the other side of it is that within that sector, and this is a very kind of operational point, but I think real estate investment is getting more operational. Within that sector, there's concerns around staffing and the availability of staff. And technology could actually take over a lot of that administrative burden that they have and make it much more automated, which would then mean that those staff can actually spend a lot more time interacting with the people in those spaces and caring for them and actually spending time with them. So I know it's a really specific point, but that's one thing that I'd really love to see.
I think you have left our audience with a lot to think about. So thank you very much for your time. Please take part in the interactive chat just to engage with anyone that has any direct questions for you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.